this computer. Here we go. All right, welcome, gentlemen. We're doing chapters 10 and 11. With this, we'll be 50% through, and I think getting into some of the more, um, not exciting, but more cryptic and symbolic content of Revelation. We're going to be introduced to a mighty angel tonight as John's first observation. There are some who is starting to read this, always looking for Christ, wonder, is it Christ? Is it Jesus that we're seeing with his face shining like the sun and pillars of fire? And we can start to believe that, but as we read a little bit further, we get a little clue that it's probably not Jesus. Although, if you're ever given a possible trick question, was Jesus an angel? Some of us might knee jerk and say, of course not, Jesus wasn't an angel. But when we remember the definition of angel means messenger of God, well, then certainly he qualifies. He was priest and prophet and king, and he was also a messenger. So technically, you'd be correct if you said Jesus was an angel, but let's not get distracted. This angel is holding a little book or small scroll, and we're led by scholars to believe that this might be a new part of the message that the angel's revealing for John to write down and make sure he captures. It shows the footing of 1 foot in the sea, 1 foot on land, showing that this person, this angel, has got sovereignty over all of creation, both the land and the sea. And then there's a little mystery in this introduction where John hears, the cry of a lion and seven thunders, and he's told not to write down what he sees. And you think, well, that's unusual. I thought this whole revelation was to explain what John was seeing, but apparently there is still some portions that God has chosen to keep to himself until the very end. We go on to see this angel raising his hand, and he swears by the eternal creator. So this is that best clue that says, no, that probably wasn't Jesus. Jesus doesn't need to swear by the creator. He is the creator. So, that sounds like more of an angel who would be doing this, not Jesus himself. This completion saying, all right, we're at the seventh trumpet. There'll be no more delay. And he talks about what's going to occur just after that. And then this discussion of a mystery, that part of something that we don't know until God chooses to reveal it, that we're going to be exposed to in verses 5 through 7. A little bit about this other little scroll. We're given an echo of a book from Ezekiel where the prophet is told to eat the words. And in this case, whatever that scroll was made of, John literally took it and ate it, and it was sweet in his mouth, but bitter in his stomach. Sounds like, me eating my favorite dish of pasta and meatballs. It's really good going down, but an hour later, it's reminding me that I'm too old to eat that kind of stuff. What it reveals is God's word is sweet, and we love to hear thy will be done and what God revealing in Revelation, but what he's revealing is judgment and suffering. So this is a time of tribulation, and that's kind of hard to swallow, as they say. This is something that's difficult for us to accept. We know we have to go through it. It's like sending yourself to the dentist. In the end, it's going to be okay, but during the tribulation, it's not going to be very enjoyable. Then we're going to find out about the recommissioning of John to continue declaring the message as he goes into chapters 11 through 20. So this is kind of like the second half of the book of Revelation. When we get into chapter 11, we're going to mention this measuring of the temple. And the old metaphor of measuring was you picture somebody who buys a house and they're in there measuring for blinds and they're measuring for furniture. It's asserting a form of ownership. They own it and they're going to measure it because it belongs to them. And what's interesting is they're going to exclude this area called the outer court. And if you remember the temple, it was broken into areas that were for Gentiles, areas that were for women, areas that were for men, areas that were for priests, and then one area that was just for the high priest and only one day a year. So there were segments of the temple that were exclusively for certain people. In this case, John is told John overhears that he's not to measure the outer court, because that outer court we know belongs to the Gentiles, and we're told that that portion of that sacred land will be trampled for this period of time, this 42 months. So we're going to hear another timestamp measure when we get into chapter 11. Um, there's also representation in Daniel that we're going to get to, and I'll mention those when we get to them a little bit later. And that's where most of the actual timing comes that we associate with Revelation and the duration of tribulation. We're going to meet two witnesses. And what's interesting here is that we're told God appoints these witnesses. Remember, he's already recruited 144,000 evangelists, Jews that have come to believe Jesus is Lord, and they're out prophesying and trying to convince the world that Jesus is Lord, and they're winning over large swaths of people during this time of tribulation. Well, these two witnesses specifically come, and they're compared to olive trees growing in lampstands. So we know a lampstand holds a lamp and it usually burns oil, olive oil. Well, if you've got a olive tree feeding right into the lampstand, it's an everlasting source of oil for those lamps and an everlasting source of light. So they're there, they proclaim God's message to this hostile world that has still not accepted Jesus, has still not repented, and they are given powers like Elijah was able to shut the sky, keep it from raining, turn water into blood. They're given great abilities, and we're introduced to this beast, and we're going to learn that this is the first mention of this coming world power that actually kills them. So you have this scenario where if you believe again in the rapture, all the Christians have disappeared, some period of time goes by. Jews have said, boy, these tribulations are terrible. We're going to start worshiping Jesus. They start evangelizing. These two witnesses come, they're telling the truth, and they are finally killed off. And it's the world saying, good, let's get rid of them. The world was better without the church and without all these people following Jesus. We want to, not be judged. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. And there's kind of the human rebellion that's going on during this tribulation. These two witnesses die, are put on display for the world to see. And then after 3.5 days, God raises them from the dead. So they are actually taken up into heaven as another sign of God saying, okay, you've done my job, come home. So we're going to be introduced to them in the chapter. Last thing I want to mention tonight is talking about time periods. We mentioned that in chapter 8, we learn about a half an hour of silence. In chapter 9, we see something measuring a period of 5 months. In chapter 11 and 12, we're going to see these 42 months and 1,260 days mentioned a couple times, and then some cryptic terms like a time, and half a time, almost like 4 score and 7. What the heck is that? If you don't know what it means, it can be very confusing. But we're going to get to what those times mean and how people have translated that to say, oh, yeah, that's the tribulation. It lasts 7 years. Everybody knows that. Well, it turns out, again, we don't know that from Revelation. That 7-year prophecy starts and is explained in Daniel. And there's these 3 verses in Daniel that explains that to us that says, 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the holy place. So we hear these terms like, seven, 70 weeks is the term that's being used. And when Daniel actually says it's 77s, it's almost like saying, 70 weeks, because 70 is referring to the days. But then they also interpret the word week to mean years because of how long the kingdom of Israel lasted from the time of the Exodus until the time of the exile to Babylon. So, there's lots of interpolation between Daniel and Revelation to get us to this understanding that we have of how long the tribulation is going to last. So we'll talk about that as we get into chapters 12 and beyond. finally, we'll get to that seventh trumpet tonight. We've been waiting for this. The seventh trumpet's going to blow. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of the Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. That's the culmination of the trumpets. That's the culmination of the coming of the end of the reign of man and the devil, and the chance for Jesus to take his position. Um, the temple in heaven is opened, and it reveals things like the Ark of the Covenant, followed by lightning and thunder and earthquake, and essentially a sign of the divine presence. He's here. So it's a very exciting aspect we're going to cover tonight. We hit stop and